Okay, so we get to the topic, which of course is our headline topic for the night, which of course is Britain's Equalities Watchdog seeks to violate the Equality Act. We actually touched on this topic, believe it or not, on the 31st of January 2021, all the way back in the Trans Agenda episode 8. 10 episodes ago, long, long ago. Under the story title, Former Head of EHRC says government is undermining its purpose. Now, the EHRC, of course, is the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, which was founded in 2007 by the Labour Party, with the intention for it to be a non-departmental public body that would assess and advise both the government and public on matters relating to equality in England and Wales. By non-departmental public body, it pretty much means that whilst it is a government institution, it is separate onto itself, and therefore it should not be influenced by the general runnings of the government, particularly whoever is in Parliament at the moment. Whether it's Conservatives or Labour. It's meant to be an independent watchdog. Now, whilst the organisation has not been without controversy in its lifespan, particularly when it comes to racism and deportation, in recent years it has largely been perceived as being supportive of both trans and LGBT plus folk in general, reaffirming their right to access spaces in line with their true gender on multiple occasions, in line with the 2010 Equalities Act. Now, the story, as we covered last time, was when David Isaac, the former chair of the HRC, that was until August of 2020, stated that the Tory government had actively undermined the purpose of the commission by December that year. Now, the reason he said this is because Liz Truss, who is a Tory MP who had previously stated that she wishes to abolish the Women's and Equalities Office in order to replace it with the Ministry of Freedom, had installed a Tory stooge, Baroness Faulkner, to the role. In the announcement on the 17th of December, Liz Truss stated, quote, "That is why I am appointing a new chair and a wide variety of commissioners to the Equality and Human Rights Commission to drive this agenda forward." End quote. And the agenda she was on about is moving away from what she termed identity politics and towards what she presented as the only form of discrimination that apparently matters these days, and that is discrimination against the white working class. I do apologise. I'm just going to have to step out for a second.
Mhm. I have not been paying attention to chat. What has chat been saying? Ninja Pro 64 says Labour has shown that it is willing to throw us under the bus for perceived political points, so it is quite scary if it becomes a big political issue. Yeah, Labour's awful.
I do apologise about that. We just had my housemate decided it'd be a great time to start the washing in the background. Yes, anyway. Liz Truss believes that the only people being discriminated are white people. She claims she's doing this in defence of the white working class. The Tory government does not give a shit about the working class. Let's just get that straight. But yes, so...
enough the news water is wet.
Yeah. She was running around making the claim that she was putting Faulkner into the position to drive this agenda forward, and I believe I described that as quote the banners unfurl moments. It is kind of that moment when the far right just unveils that it's taken over everything, the banners fall down, ah ha 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 ha, we have control, because it really did feel like that. With everything going on in the UK, having the EHRC, on our side, defending our back as trans people, that was one of the few things that kept us going. So now to see that Liz Truss had just, put some Tory stooges in the roles, it was a very scary time. And we began to see issues coming up involving that. But in December of 2021, or was it 2020? 2020, yes. December 2020, David criticized the idea that the government should have the power to, assign people to an independent commission, stating that, quote, "My view is that an independent regulator shouldn't be in a position where the governments of the day can actually influence the appointments of that body to support a particular ideology," end quote. It's also worth noting that this came at a time during which an investigation by the EHRC into Islamophobia in the Tory party was put on hold to allow them to do a review first. So it seems like maybe the Tory party was thinking, well, if our review is rejected and then the EHRC has to do their own review, let's get someone who supports the Tory party into the position, So it came at an incredibly dodgy time. More recently, however, the EHRC found itself embroiled in controversy as the institution, which only operates in England and Wales, attempted to warn Scottish parliamentarians away from simplifying the path to receive one's gender recognition certificate, in spite of Scotland having had 2 separate consultations on the matter since 2017. Now, a GRC is not required to update a British passport or driver's license, so actual photo ID, you can change those without a gender recognition certificate, but is required to update one's birth certificate, which is then required to change one's marriage certificate, tax forms, and pension forms. So all private pieces of data, things that you deal with in relating to the government, shouldn't really be giving to anyone else. Those are the only things a GRC is actually required to change. A lot of the hysteria surrounding the Gender Recognition Act reform has been purely fabricated. It's a complete myth. It has none of the impacts they claim. Trans people can already access single gender spaces. They have the photo ID, passports, driver's license that allows them to do that. It's a form of self-declaration, which is not just going, you know what, today I feel like X. It is a legal declaration where you pay a certain amount, you get your gender markers updated on these photo ID, etc. You have to pay for new photo ID. It is a legal document, and if you're found to have lied on said legal documents, for example, if you lied about your gender in order to gain some sort of benefit, probably a financial benefit, you would be able to you would be held to that. That is something you could be legally held to. Okay, it's not just a case of on a whim I change and I am. That's also a complete lie. But again, GRC has no impact on photo ID, no impact on access. Of course, the attempts to warn the Scottish parliamentarians away from this is in line with Liz Truss's previous actions in which, after years of debate and consultation for similar changes to the Gender Recognition Act in the UK, England and Wales, that proved itself to be overwhelmingly popular among English and Welsh citizens, more so women than men, it must be noted. Liz Truss decided to suddenly scrap the entire thing and pretend like it had never happened. This will actually come up later as well. I'm sorry, I'm kind of getting scrambled here right now. I'll just try to bring myself down a bit. However, far more alarmingly, the EHRC was also dragged for defending reparative torture, what is sometimes referred to as conversion therapy of trans people, arguing against a blanket ban against their practice, seemingly out of the fear that Faulkner's friends would no longer be allowed to torture children. The way they did this was by claiming that the term reparative torture and even transgender are both vaguely defined. We also saw the attempt to defend the practice on religious grounds, harking back to what Levi was talking about in his section, with the report stating that, quote, "Practices should not be banned that enable individuals to explore, reflect on, or understand their sexual orientation or being transgender, nor should LGBT people be prevented from seeking spiritual support from their faith leader in the exploration of their sexual orientation or being transgender, including within their families, schools, and communities. Encouraging people to comply with religious doctrine that requires refraining from certain types of sexual activity should not fall within the definitions of conversion therapy either. However, faith and community leaders should be made aware of the ban on conversion therapy in order that they understand the importance of compliance. End quote. So there's a couple of things to sort of pick out there. For one, there's this idea that, conversion therapy is being used. Because when it comes to the whole exploration of sexual orientation, that is originally not a particularly charged term in the LGBT+ community, but when you start to include transphobes, it's become a charged term. Because sadly, we had transphobes who use the narrative that trans people are existing because they are lesbian, gay, bisexual people who have not been allowed to explore their sexuality and have been told, no, you're not gay, you're trans, this really absurd notion. So there's a little bit of that coming through there. But we also see, again, the notion of religious exemption in regards to what is recognized as torture by the medical community. Of course, the entire thing was absolutely appalling. The government got dragged for it. And said words were rightfully condemned by LGBT+ organisations throughout the UK, including Stonewall, leading to the demand that both the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions investigates the EHRC's ongoing attacks on trans and LGBT+ people in the UK. So, the LGBT+ community in the UK has mobilised. It's clearly causing a lot of distress, and these are two major things happened one after the other. However, on the 2nd of February 2022, Vice World News published Britain's Equalities Watchdog met privately with anti-trans groups, an article detailing how evidence accessed via a Freedom of Information request exposed the Equalities Watchdog as having held multiple meetings with anti-trans hate organisations, as well as having direct contact with some of said groups' leaders. One such person was Nicola Williams, founder of the far-right AstroTurf group Fair Play to Women. If you're unfamiliar with the term AstroTurf, it refers to a fake grassroots movement. So, grassroots means by the people, so they construct themselves, it's not about external forces. An AstroTurf group is a group designed to look like that. For example, Fair Play for Women. You might think that this is British women coming together saying, hey, we have an issue with this. It's not. It is largely far-right conservative Christian groups in America funding a few radicals here in the UK, mostly men, presenting a few women as kind of their token women, and then going, see, women are concerned. When, no, it's just the far right, After Ms. Williams reached out to Falconer switched from her EHRC email to her parliamentary address, asking whether she'd be able to call Ms. Williams within the hour. That's how uncool she was with these groups. When the largest LGBT+ organisations in the UK were approached by Vice, asked if they'd received the same offer, they all confirmed they had not. So we clearly see there's this double standard here, preferential treatment going on, where the hate group is literally on call of the EHRC, but actual LGBT+ organisations are not. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add here so far.
Nope, I don't think so. I mean, all of this so far is disgusting, but I don't really have anything clever to say about it.
It came to light that EHRC member, Alastair Henderson, who had represented Kira Bell in the Tavistock case, had personally intervened in the Maya Four-Starter case. Their part in the Four-Starter case led more than 40 leading LGBT plus organisations in the UK to sign a letter stating that, quote, "The EHRC has driven forward very little for our communities in recent years. We are frustrated that you choose to intervene in a case to say that so-called gender-critical beliefs should be protected philosophical belief," end quote. Returning to the Tavistock case I just mentioned, that was a case in which the High Court of England and Wales stripped trans people under the age of 18 full medical consent. What's important to note is the fact that the standard for full medical consent in the UK is 16. Yet what's really worrying is how members of the EHRC didn't seem to know. This email was sent the day before the case's initial ruling. Henderson, one of our commissioners, is one of the barristers challenging the Tavistock. Were we aware that he was involved in the case? End quote. So it's this complete breakdown of like, whose side are we actually on? Another group with regular access to Faulkner is the anti-trans hate group, the LGB Alliance, a group which not only attacks trans folk routinely, but denies the existence of biphobia and argues against teaching about gay people in schools because of, quote, predatory gay teachers, end quote, calling LGBT plus positive lessons, quote, unnecessary encouragement to predators, end quote.
Yeah.
Quite clearly the same anti-gay panic as seen in decades prior. They were approached by members of the EHRC to offer their advice on the topic of trans people. In the video they produced, they referred to transitioning as, quote, horrifying, end quote, adding that, quote, it leads to a life of infertility, loss of sexual feeling, continuous medical and appalling surgery. Continuous medication and appalling surgery. We're so glad we were not growing up in this kind of ethos which we have today, end quote. They also stated that the NHS is carrying out, quote, medical experiments on children, end quote, echoing back to Graham Linehan there, before stating that, quote, we don't need to go into much detail about that because Alistair Henderson on your board will be able to explain all about it, end quote. So that's how chummy they were with Mr. Henderson. That literally, they said, you know what, we don't even need to continuing smearing the existence of trans people and like claiming that gay people are all sexual predators. Just ask the person that Liz Truss also put on your board and he'll explain it to you. It's really just mortifying about the entire thing, to be honest. Of course, the HRC denies it, telling Vice World News after they were approached that, quote, we exist to protect, enforce and promote equality and human rights laws for everyone, including trans people, end quote. Really? When like you've got multiple hate organizations on call, that's the lie you're going with. That you actually here to like, you know, promote equality. It's just, it really is absolutely disgusting. Now, one thing I'm gonna have to kind of like discuss here is...
Sorry, excuse me. Anti-omnus, I'm not entirely sure what you're going for, and I don't think you're acting in bad faith or anything, but I just am not really comfortable about talking about predators in like a joking manner like that.
Oh,
I don't think it's a good idea.
I didn't notice that. I'm just gonna...
Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I mean, that is kind of a problem still.
Sorry, I didn't notice that. I've kind of been just going...
Oh yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyway, yes, one thing I'm going to have to talk about here, and this is something that I've seen a lot of LGBT plus people in the UK doing, and I don't want to say I get the sentiment, but I get why they're reaching for it, but it's just not true, is I've noticed a lot of people going, oh well, how is no one like talking about this more? If the EHRC was like having meetings with, the EDL or, like racist groups or predominantly racist groups like that, suddenly everyone would be taking it seriously. And I just want to like go on record stating that that is just not fucking true. We're currently dealing with like people fucking, you know, years ago, like, yeah, the jokes are just surface, but like there's still people arguing that, hey, making jokes about like the Nazis exterminating the Roma got something right, that this is fine, sort of thing. It's like people do not take racism in the UK seriously, so please just don't fucking do it, okay? Don't do this whole comparison thing of if it was about people of color, they'd be taking it seriously. They don't. Again, the HRC has also been dragged for racism, as we'll actually come back to later. So they don't. It's not taken seriously in the UK. I just want to express that because I have been noticing quite a few people making that argument. Anyway, of course,
personally, I stopped making racial comparisons. Racism comparisons about a year ago, maybe a bit more, and I think it's one of the best decisions I ever made. Like, it's just not necessary.
Yeah. And like again, I part of me does like get the urge to always do this comparison because we always like assume that the grass is greener on the other side. Another common one, of course, is comparing everything to the Holocaust.
Yeah, just don't do it. You can just not.
Yeah. Like there are times when it's like to have a conversation. For example, we talk about the way that the transphobia, the trans hysteria we're seeing, a lot of it is repackaged homophobia, the whole gay teacher scare. But we don't really talk about the facts that how a lot of the trans misogyny specifically, the arguments that are used have been perfected through anti-black racism and anti-dark, racism. But that's not saying, well, if it was a race issue, it would be taken seriously. No, it will not. I can almost guarantee you there. Wolf, as there's a big overlap between groups like EDL and the LGBT Alliance, of course, yes. The HR in fact meeting with the EDL. Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. Same for Fair Play to Women. Of course, we've talked about Posey Parker in previous episodes and her involvement in fascism, etc. Yeah, so just don't make that argument. It's not good. It just makes LGBT plus people of colour feel alienated from their own experiences. Because when you're telling, it will be taken seriously, and literally they will tell you, no, it's not. It's not.
When's the last time racism was taken seriously? Be honest with me.
I can't answer that. Anyway, of course, as mentioned, the HRC was denying it. When the article went out, the quote I gave was before the article. That was when they were approached about the article before it went out. When the article went out, they went public, stating the following on Twitter, quote, "In response to allegations surrounding the integrity of our commissioners, our statement is below." A spokesperson said, again, requote, "We are aware that allegations have been published about the integrity of our commissioners with unsubstantiated and incorrect statements that rely on information taken out of context. We are an independent statutory body. Our board is appointed through the standard public appointment process. We are committed to upholding the rights of all people in Britain. Our work is informed by evidence and we engage with a large number of expert stakeholders to gather views on complex issues. On trans rights issues, we operate an open door policy and will listen to and engage with stakeholders with a wide range of differing and opposing views. We have long-standing relations with trans-led organizations and LGBT bodies, as well as religious groups, women's rights organizations, and campaign groups. This is important to ensure that we are protecting and promoting the rights of everyone in this emotive and complex area. We take the same balanced and meticulous approach in our work on trans rights as we do in every other area, and to suggest otherwise is wrong. Our commissioners bring a wealth of experience beyond their roles on our board. Alistair Henderson is a highly respected human rights barrister who acts in the interest of and on the instructions of his clients. Our chairwoman, Kishwa Faulkner, has a parliamentary role, and as such, her email address is publicly available. Sensationalist reporting on human rights is harmful. We need a balanced and respectful conversation to avoid further damage and division. End quote. Except the entire fears that have been promoted by fake women's groups are just 100% fabricated. Like, it's not a case of there's nuance here to talk about. It is literally just straight up. It's completely fabricated. Trans women have access to these gender spaces. They always have since 2010, you know? So we're not talking about a nuanced issue here. Someone is just going, predators, and pointing at the LGBT plus people, and the EHRC is pretending like it's a debate. It's not a debate. There's no debate here. But yes, thing is, as much as the HRC claims that there was no actual evidence or anything, interesting enough, when Vice had approached them about the specifics of their findings, the HRC had only given them the very blanket, statement. They hadn't actually responded to anything specific. But then, the Trans Safety Network corroborated the claims of Vice World News, drawing on the work of Trans Liberty UK, which noticed that key wording on the EHRC's equality tracker had been changed, seemingly upon the request of the LGBT Alliance. The original statement on the tracker read, quote, "In September 2020, the government's response to its 2018 consultation on the Gender Recognition Act of 2004 announced welcome steps to move the system online and reduce the application fee for gender recognition certificate, but declined to simplify the law to remove unnecessary barriers transgender people face in obtaining a GRC." End quote. Okay. The last line has been changed to, quote, "to demedicalize the system for legal gender recognition or to move to a system of self-identification that some groups have been calling for." End quote. Now, a Freedom of Information request gave the email in which the LGBT Alliance points out the line that, quote, "but declined to simplify the law to remove unnecessary barriers transgender people face in obtaining a GRC," end quote, stating that those of them at the LGBT Alliance had simply assumed it was a mistake and that the EHRC needed to change it. That's when the change occurred to demedicalize the system, which some groups have been calling for. So, there is very clear evidence here that they are literally editing stuff at the request of the LGBT Alliance, which again has been proven to be entirely hateful. It's really interesting how the HRC is trying to claim that it's completely fraudulent, nothing's actually happening, everything's fine, nothing to see here. But this is where Vice did the really smart thing. You see, rather than just publishing everything they had in a single article, they staggered their articles. So that meant after the EHRC had categorically denied their claims, they came out with a second article, this time titled, "Staff are quitting Britain's Equality Watchdog, the EHRC, due to transphobia," which was published on the 4th of February. Said article noted how many were leaving due to the EHRC being institutionally transphobic, stating that it had become, quote, "the enemy of human rights," end quote, with many quitting without having other jobs lined up. Now, I just need to pause here to bring you to the context of what is currently going on. We've got the pandemic going on, right now, out of all the times, job security is really up in the air. So for someone to feel that the work environment they're in is so hostile that they just quit without having a backup plan, that shows this is not just an iffy feeling or something. These are people who just do not have any, they have no confidence whatsoever in the organization. So again, that just really shows how dire the entire situation is. On top of this, others are considering striking, with recent union meetings discussing staff concerns being attended by over half of the EHRC's employees. 3 whistleblowers still working at the EHRC approached Vice News about the, quote, anti-LGBT plus agenda, quote, end quote, being adopted by senior members of staff. Vice also spoke to 6 senior members of staff who have or are in the process of leaving. They described board members changing documents so they became, quote, transphobic and seriously inaccurate, end quote. We saw that a little bit with the LGBT Alliance. One stated that, quote, I was seeing our upcoming publications and guidance pushing for trans rights to be changed or completely scrapped and shelved permanently. Meanwhile, the board was building links to anti-trans groups. It is awful, end quote. Another added that, quote, when I started in 2018, we were all celebrating LGBT rights and the EHRC was pushing to make the UK better for LGBT people. It's like working for a different organisation now. Trans rights don't personally affect me, but it's the fact that I have to look into the eyes of my trans friends and they know that I'm part of something damaging them. Staff are being pushed to not be so woke and forced to be more impartial. But then we're seeing statements from our leaders that are transphobic or racist and incredibly damaging, end quote. One thing I'd like to point out there is the usage of the word woke. In the same way that, cancel culture both appropriated and pejoritized the African American vernacular English word of cancelling, which is simply a withdrawal of support, kind of like a personal boycott. Taking it and turning it into this negative boogeyman. Woke is also another word that reactionaries have stolen from Black Twitter, Black groups, and Black voices, and have again pejoritized it. So we see that here as well. Another member added that, quote, I left a few weeks ago. It's a terrifying time to be there. I didn't realize the impact it was having on my well-being until I got out. I wanted to join the commission because I knew the power that it had to make an impact in the human rights space. Most people in the UK don't even know the EHRC exists, but it can really hold the government to account, end quote. Vice also reads that, quote, another former employee who left at the end of 2021 told Vice World News that Faulkner had personally changed EHRC publications about trans people, making the documents more critical of gender identity and actively going against the organization's own guidance to protect people's rights based on gender reassignment. The ex-staff member said, quote, one paper was so heavily edited by Faulkner that it left people speechless. She changed the case studies, the language. It was so transphobic. There was no way it would get published. Faulkner is incompetent when it comes to LGBT rights. She is a wolf in sheep's clothing, and she has no credibility in the space. She's come in and shown a complete disregard for a huge amount of expertise in the organization, end quote. It's worth mentioning that Vice attempted to gain access to said paper, but was sadly refused. Another staff member stated that, quote, anyone working on LGBT policy will be trying to leave if they actually care about LGBT rights. Nobody knows what to do right now. If you leave, then you're giving in to hate. But if you stay, you'll have to constantly defend your choices to friends and to charities and to yourself. I don't know anyone in the HRC that wants Baroness Faulkner to stay. Any comments so far from you?
No, sorry. This is a lot of information.
I'm sorry, but it's just I just want to get through all these quotes to kind of show the smorgasbord of what people are coming forward and saying.
Yeah.
Another former staff member added that, quote, it was as if Baroness Faulkner and the board wanted people who actually cared about human rights to leave. Nobody seemed bothered that staff were deeply affected by the leadership change. We were having a leaving do every single week. Some of our roles were being changed or moved, and that made people want to go even faster, but ultimately people couldn't cope with the changes, end quote. When asked about said changes, the person responded with, quote, they were anti-trans, not recognizing racism, Management would call people for supporting LGBTQ rights and would edit publications to make them more gender critical, completely ignoring everyone's expertise. End quote. So again, racism is also a part of this, and it's important to point that out as well. Sadly, the Vice article doesn't give like clear examples of this, but yeah. Okay, another stated that, quote, the complete U-turn on the Gender Recognition Act had absolutely no evidence to back it up, but it still happened. For me, there was suddenly this new kind of emphasis on the need to be evidence-based. But that doesn't mean we weren't actually collecting evidence before. We've always had people employed as researchers, and we have staff with lived experiences too. This new push was about dismissing anything they didn't like, end quote. Okay, we got 3 more quotes, okay? Then we get through. I promise we will get through this soon. Another added that, quote, I don't know how the EHRC can say it's compliant with the public sector equality duty it works so hard to promote. It's supposed to eliminate discrimination, advance the equality of people with protected characteristics, and promote good relations between minority groups and others. Where is that happening? End quote. Another stated that the EHRC were, quote, hyper aware of potential leaks, of potential for leaks, end quote, and this is why the internal issues have not leaked to the media before now. Said person also added that, quote, they're ready to penalise people for doing it. People are being threatened with disciplinaries right now, staff are receiving warnings around social media use and being told not to react to news, and to not complain internally, and to not be seen as an activist, end quote. So, that is a lot to deal with right there. There's so much going on there, there's so much thrown at the wall here, and it's just undeniable. It's just drowning out. The HRC is just standing there saying, like, there's nothing behind the claims being made by Vice, and like Vice just comes out and just straight away destroys this notion. Because again, nobody is just gonna leave a like secure job right now with the pandemic going on and everything like that. Things have really got horrific. For someone to be leaving each week, like seriously, there is an issue there. It's interesting, isn't it, how during the transphobic hate campaign at Tavistock, they were complaining about how many members of staff were leaving, ignoring the fact that it was below the average for NHS, considering how many staff were there. And they were saying that this is evidence that, you know, that they don't have faith in the whole Tavistock system. It's like, well, actually, most of these people have just moved on to other places or other roles or just gone up the ladder somewhere else, you know. There's no evidence that any of them disagree with Tavistock and like puberty blockers and stuff. But now when it comes to like that the EHRC is like hemorrhaging its members, all of whom are coming forward independently, talking anonymously, saying the exact same thing to a news outlet, and suddenly, oh, it's just all misinformation, it's all fabrication, you know. I don't know if you have any words on that. It really is just infuriating, this double standard that's going on. Sorry. Is there anything you'd like to add?
The only thing that jumped out at me is, yeah, it is spectacular that they're leaving so quickly in this economy, but I mean, the fact that there are that many people leaving that quickly, even in a better economy, I think would be.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying like it wouldn't be suspicious them, but it's just like,
I'm not saying that you are. I'm just saying like it's not normal for people to be. If your workplace is completely fine and there's nothing wrong, it's not normal for you to be hemorrhaging workers.
Yeah.
It's just extra special that it's happening in this economy in particular.
Yeah.
It's almost like the position, the conditions unbearable because they don't want to have to deal with people trying to do their jobs in a way they don't like.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Of course, this entire thing has drawn the attention of many outside the EHRC. For example, Joe Morgan, the director of the Good Law Project, the campaigning group that helped overturn the Tavistock ruling, had the following to say. Quote, under the EHRC, human rights have turned 180 degrees. No longer are they protection for minorities against popular sentiment. Now they are mechanics which turn that sentiment, and the hostility of ministers into policy. End quote. Mermaids, the children's charity, the trans children's charity in the UK, had the following to add. Quote, the EHRC has completely lost the trust of our community. The deputy of the EHRC is to...
The duty
of the EHRC is to advance equality, yet it is actively doing the opposite for trans people. An urgent root and branch reform is needed, starting with a new chair that is truly independent. End quote. Again, calling out the Faulkner-Liz Truss relation there. Of course, the whole root and branch means that the entire thing just needs to be torn out, restart, start over again. I think that's the Scottish National Party. That should be SNP. MP John Nicholson, Deputy Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Global LGBT+ Rights in the UK Parliament, said, quote, sadly, the EHRC appears now to be working against, not for, LGBT rights. Our community is no longer sees it as our friend, but as our opponent. It's yet another organisation tainted by Boris Johnson and his appointees. Now, I just want to call this out. Do I believe Liz Truss has had a significant impact as a stooge for Boris and subsequently Faulkner as her stooge? Yes. Do I think this issue would entirely disappear under Labour? Fuck no. Again, Labour has incredible issues with transphobia, racism, etc. So,
Labour's just
you can't just blame
as well.
Boris Johnson. Again, Conservative Party, absolute wankers. Hate them. Hate their guts. But at the same time, I do take issue when someone comes along and says, it's just Boris Johnson. No, this problem didn't start with Boris Johnson. This problem was going on before Boris Johnson, and it will continue after Boris Johnson. Okay? Anyway, the last major article we'd like to talk about is Vice's third, and as of this show, final article on the EHRC, titled Leaked EHRC Guidance Reveals Plans to Exclude Most Trans People from Bathrooms, published on the 10th of February. It was revealed that the EHRC was getting ready to publish new documents informing private businesses that they should deny trans people access to gender spaces such as bathrooms unless they had a GRC, so the Gender Recognition Certificate, which is worth noting only an estimated 1% of trans people in the UK are thought to have. This, of course, is a direct violation of the 2010 Equality Act. The 2010 Equality Act states that a person, regardless of their transition status, is to be allowed access to bathrooms, crisis centres, domestic violence shelters. They should be assessed on a case-by-case basis in certain institutions, as with everyone. But there can be no blanket ban of trans people, as the EHRC's policy seemed to be going towards. Rebecca Hisselmrath, former EHRC CEO, had written in 2020 that laws about gender spaces, quote, do not hinge on whether the trans person has a GRC or not, end quote. So again, it goes against previous EHRC rulings. So it's very clear that this is just being brought about by a Tory stooge. Now, said document was never published, most likely due to Vice beginning to ask questions regarding the issue in the weeks prior to publishing, because whilst the article came out in February, they had of course been asking the HRC questions about what had been leaked prior to that, and that's likely why it was never published. Some critics have been quick to point out that such policy would be ungovernable. Again, you don't require a GRC to change your driver's license or your passport, which are actual forms of photo ID, marriage certificates, pension forms. That's not proof of identity. So even if you could have a person standing outside each public bathroom, how could you govern this? They can't. Sadly, a lot of people here seem to think that the issue is just about policing this and oh, it's only an issue if it can be acted upon, when that's not the case. As mentioned earlier in regards to the Australian bill that was almost passed, just the fact that it exists in policy, just the fact that trans people are being told that they're not allowed in these spaces, that will have an impact. That will still impact how trans people feel they can exist in day-to-day life, out in public, out in society. It also ignores the violence all women will experience as a result of such policies. I talked recently about Amy Toms in one of my recent videos. For those who don't know, Amy Toms is a cis woman in the US who grows her hair long. She then shaves it off and she donates it to children's charities, specifically charities which deal with child patients of cancer, so that they can make real hair wigs and the children can have long hair. After she shaved her hair, she was approached in a bathroom and harassed by a cis woman who assumed she was transgender because of her short hair. That sort of thing is going to happen. The Tories don't actually have to police this. They don't have to put guards everywhere. The companies don't have to do it either. The public will do it. Bigots will do it. They will feel emboldened. If they think a trans person is entering a bathroom, they'll see that as the point in time where they get to be the hero, defending cis women and cis girls, and they will target that person, regardless of whether they are trans or not. Is there anything you'd like to add there?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. Oriella, threat is how it will be used. Yes. I'm just having a quick read through the comments quickly. Yeah. Anyway. What's also interesting that came out during this final article is the fact that Faulkner apparently wanted the EHRC to become involved when the UK department store, John Lewis, adopted gender-neutral fitting rooms in April of 2021, but was later talked down from it until the EHRC's new position had been published. Of course, that new position never went out. And it really does show that, again, Faulkner is not just someone who's presiding over this. Faulkner is someone who is leading this. She really has it in for trans people. She is just going after us in any way she can. And it's got so bad that even some Tory MPs have begun calling the issue out. Blunt, the Tory MP, stated that, quote, it does now appear the rights of trans people under the... It does now appear that the rights of trans people are under direct assault in the UK from the public body they would, until now, have expected to be the most steadfast in their defence. Baroness Faulkner should reflect seriously on the effect her decisions to date on this most vulnerable group and bring them back to being consistent with evidence. She should also not underestimate the breakdown in trust and confidence in her leadership within her organisation, as it is her officials whose evidence and advice is being discounted. End quote. So again, even some Tories can't ignore the issue currently. Of course, with the third and final article coming out, the EHRC once again denied the allegations, taking to both Twitter and the EHRC website to state the following. Quote, we aim to publish guidance on single-sex spaces in due course, in line with our mandate to advise on equality and human rights laws, and in response to long-standing calls from a range of stakeholders and service providers. Any guidance we produce will explain how to comply with the legal provisions approved by Parliament in the Equality Act. It is completely false to suggest that we are looking to bar trans people from accessing spaces without a gender recognition certificate. We are not aware of any document produced by the EHRC that would support this. The Equality Act's provisions on gender reassignment are not predicated on possession or not of a gender recognition certificate. End quote. And that sounds good. Except even at the time of the article, Vice noted that, quote, the Good Law Project campaign group produced another document to Vice World News confirming that the EHRC's current leadership team now wants GRCs to be key to accessing single-sex services, end quote. So it wasn't even Vice just speaking on its own. Vice had confirmation by a legal institution in the UK. So the brazenness going on behind this bullshit, this lying, this gaslighting, because that is all it is at this point. Like, yeah, we get it. Under the Equality Act, people don't require a GRC. But you're trying to change that. 2 independent sources, a news source which has been corroborated by members of your own organisation, and a legal firm, both confirm it independently. And yet, we're supposed to just trust the EHRC. And it's like how foolish do they think we are? Now, all of this news led Stonewall to continue pushing for action, publishing their piece titled Major LGBTQ+ Organizations Spark International Review of the EHRC on the 22nd of February, submitting a 19-page document detailing the EHRC's transgressions and failures to uphold the standards of dignity and equality for LGBT+ citizens. But that isn't all. As the icing on the cake, we finally got to hear from Baroness Faulkner herself. She did an interview, and the interview was an absolute farce. Like, seriously, the interview was so soft on Faulkner, it was very clearly pushing a far-right narrative, but there is just one part I need to bring attention to. When the interviewer asked Baroness Faulkner, quote, "Are you a transphobe?" end quote, Baroness Faulkner responded with, quote, "I don't know what the meaning of that word is," end quote. This woman is the head of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, and she admits she doesn't know what the word transphobe apparently means. What's more is, when the interviewer asked her, quote, well, yes, it was a question. When the interviewer asked her, quote, it gets bandied around a lot of, quote, it gets bandied around a lot of, god damn it.
Do you want me to read it?
Go ahead.
It gets bandied around a lot at the moment, though, doesn't it?
End quote. She responded, quote, too much, end quote. If you don't know what the term transphobia means, how the fuck can you offer judgment about whether the term is bandied around too much? Of course, she does know what the term is, but she is just doing everything she can to avoid the question. And yeah, that is the story up to now, and it is just completely shot all trust the LGBT+ community had in the HRC. And we've seen with this whole staggering, the way that Vice waited until like the HRC denied what it showed in its first article to then immediately publish the other articles. Like, it was a massacre. But sadly, you know, most people don't know about it. It's really ridiculous.
I feel, because transphobia is the controversial issue right now, I feel like we all get a little bit desensitized to just how bad it is. So I want to imagine that exchange again, but with, let's say, sexism. I know sexism isn't taken as seriously as it should be either, but it's definitely taken a bit more seriously. Imagine, are you a sexist? I don't know what the meaning of that word is. It gets bandied around a lot at the moment, though, doesn't it? Too much, too much. Imagine that. Imagine the Imagine someone who's in charge of equality saying they don't know what a sexist is
It's amazing.
and saying that there's too much talk of sexism.
And the way that she goes, our report will be evidence based. It was supposed to go out last month until you got caught with the fucking hand in the cookie jar, and yet you just admitted, like half a month after it was supposed to come out, that you don't know what the word transphobia means. Like,
This report on this thing I don't understand is not evidence-based.
it's really like one of those comics where it's like, you know, the convention for like mouse rights, and it's just all cats, you know.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely. It's just appalling. It's shocking in so many ways, but it's also, it's so familiar, and you know, it's part of what I expect. The fucking consultation was in 2018. Like, my life is just doing this sort of thing. I just see my life just slipping through my hands by like how nothing is changing here. It's just, yeah. But that should hopefully bring you up to date with everything regarding the EHRC. It'll be interesting to see how, you know, Stonewall's petition, whether the United Nations is going to get involved and is going to get investigating things. I love cats, okay? It's not cat slander, but it's still, it's just, yeah. It's also funny because, like, with the whole document thing, again, someone did freedom of information, this trust has, like, turned it down, and it's like, oh, but it doesn't contain this stuff. Okay, if it doesn't contain that stuff, why don't you let us see it then? It's also interesting, especially considering the Tory government is pushing through the policing bill right now, and they're like saying, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, in spite of the fact that how it hurts, you know, Romanian people, not Romanian, Roman people, you know, and everyone else, and how it hurts the LGBT plus community and the black communities. And I say, if you've got nothing to like hide, you don't have to worry about it. But when it comes to holding them accountable, they're like, oh no, we can't show you that. No, we're not showing you this. Yeah, this is just. Yeah.
I mean, it was clear when they stood when they're like, we need to abolish equality and institute freedom.
Yes, because of course that's the whole double speak. It's not just the double speak of like, oh yeah, we're for equality, but we don't know what transphobia means. It's just also like this conservative notion of freedom, which is the freedom to treat marginalized people the way that we've always treated them. You know, that's how they see freedom. It's not the freedom as a marginalized person to go forth and like achieve based on the merits, the actual idea of meritocracy, as opposed to
or even the freedom
myth
to just
of meritocracy. Just the freedom not to be abused. You know,
the freedom to, you know, identify how you feel best fits who you are, to present the way you want to, the freedom to have, to modify your body in how it
freedom
makes
to exist.
you comfortable. Yeah, the freedom to exist. Because freedom is when we prevent other people from doing things we don't like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something I forgot to say when I was talking about the Australian bill was it's this classic thing of, you know, I can say I am transgender, but I can't say you are transgender if you're not. That would be ridiculous. You know, that would be imposing on you. But religious people, you know, if a religious person came up to me and said, I am not going to medically transition because it's against my religious beliefs, or if they said, I'm not going to marry someone of the same gender because it's against my religious beliefs, it would be weird, but I would probably just shrug because what they're doing doesn't impact me. But it's religious people, or in this case, the Equalities minister, going up to people and basically saying, I it's against my beliefs to marry someone of the same gender, so you can't do that. It's against my beliefs to transition, so you can't do that. It's just a complete misunderstanding of what freedom is.
To take it outside like the context of bigotry, it's saying, how dare you eat that donut, it goes against my diet.
Yeah.
Except it's more akin to slapping the donut out of someone's hand because you're actually causing fucking harm. You know?
Yeah. Trying to make donuts illegal because you're on a diet.
The Afghans would never go for that. They do good donuts. Yeah.